The steam from the industrial-sized stockpot smelled of onions and thyme, a scent that had woven itself into the fabric of my Tuesdays and Thursdays. It was a good smell, an honest one. It was the smell of purpose, a small anchor in the choppy waters of my life. For 2 nights a week, I was not Leo, the guy whose graphic design portfolio was gathering digital dust while he stocked shelves at a 24-hour convenience store. I was Leo, the volunteer who knew exactly how much pepper to add to the soup and how to ladle it without splashing the sides of the bowl. It was a small, clean skill, and I cherished it. My station was beside the bread. My job was simple, one buttered roll for every bowl. Sometimes two, if a person looked like they needed it more. From my post, I had a clear view of the entire serving line, the dining hall, and the man who managed the dishwashing station with the quiet competence of a ship's captain. His name was Arthur. I had known this for 6 months, but I had never said more than a handful of words to him. He was older, maybe by 20 years, maybe more. His hair was silver at the temples, thick and well-kept. His hands, when he wasn't wearing the heavy-duty yellow gloves, were large and marked with the faint, faded scars of a life lived doing more than signing papers. He was, as Brenda, the kitchen manager, had whispered to me in a conspiratorial tone one evening, the money, not just a donor, but the primary benefactor. The reason the lights stayed on and the pantry was never bare. Yet, he was here every Tuesday and Thursday, just like me, scrubbing burnt stew from the bottom of pots with a focused intensity that left no room for conversation. He never sought praise. He never made a show of his work. He simply arrived, put on an apron, and worked until the last dish was dried and stacked. I watched him. I told myself it was simple curiosity, an interest in the kind of quiet man who could own half the city and still choose to spend his evenings in the steam and clatter of a soup kitchen. But it was more than that. It was the way he'd listen, really listen, when one of the guests would stop to talk to him, his gaze steady and patient. It was the gentle way he'd place a hand on the shoulder of a new, nervous volunteer, a silent gesture of reassurance. There was a stillness about him, a centered gravity that I, in my perpetual state of floating anxiety, found myself drawn to. My life was a collection of temporary things. A month-to-month lease on a room that was always too cold, a job I hoped not to have in a year, friendships that had faded with distance, and my own inability to pretend everything was fine. The soup kitchen was the only permanent feeling thing I had, and Arthur was the most permanent part of it. He was a quiet foundation, and I found myself, more often than I cared to admit, studying the lines around his eyes and wondering what he saw when he looked out at the world. One particular Thursday in November, the sky opened up. It wasn't just rain. It was a cold, driving deluge that turned the streets into dark, reflective rivers. The wind howled against the windows of the dining hall, a mournful sound that made the warmth inside feel even more precious. We served an extra 30 people that night, folks seeking shelter as much as a hot meal. By the time we were cleaning up, the storm had only intensified. The rhythmic thump of the industrial dishwasher was a steady counterpoint to the thrashing of rain against the glass. I was wiping down the bread station, the scent of yeast and melted butter still clinging to the air. Brenda had already left, calling out a cheerful "Don't work too hard, boys," over her shoulder. It was just me and Arthur left, moving through the familiar, practiced rhythm of closing down. I stacked the last of the clean trays, the metal cool against my fingertips, and glanced at the clock. 10:30. The last bus, my only way home, had left at 10. A familiar knot of dread tightened in my stomach. A 45-minute walk in this weather wasn't just unpleasant. It was borderline dangerous with the wind picking up. I pulled my phone from my pocket, hoping for a miracle. No service. Of course. I stood there for a moment, just breathing, trying to push down the rising panic. It was my own fault. I should have been watching the time. I should have planned better. It was the story of my life. These small, stupid mistakes that cascaded into much larger problems. "Everything all right, Leo?" The voice was low and calm, startling me out of my spiraling thoughts. It was Arthur. He had finished with the dishes and was wiping his hands on a clean towel, his gaze on me. It wasn't a prying look, it was just observant. He had a way of looking at people as if he were simply taking in information, assessing a situation without judgment. I tried for a casual smile. "Just fine. Looks like I'll be getting a bit of a shower on my way home." I gestured vaguely toward the windows, where rain was lashing against the panes. He followed my gaze, his expression unreadable for a moment. He folded the towel with careful precision and set it on the counter. You walk. I take the bus, I admitted, the words feeling like a confession of failure. Missed the last one, he nodded slowly, as if this was a perfectly logical outcome he had already considered. He hung his apron on its designated hook. That won't do. The wind is getting worse. Where do you live? I told him the cross streets, feeling a flush of embarrassment. It wasn't the best part of town. It was the part of town where people like me lived, the part people like him usually just drove through on their way to somewhere better. He didn't so much as blink. That's on my way. I'll give you a ride. It wasn't a question or a grand offer. It was a simple statement of fact, a solution to a problem. He said it with the same quiet authority he used when directing someone to the correct bin for recycling. Oh no, you don't have to do that, I said, the automatic refusal springing to my lips before I could stop it. I didn't want to be a burden, a project. I can walk. It's not that far. Arthur picked up his coat from the back of a chair. It was a simple, dark wool coat, but it hung on his frame in a way that spoke of quality I couldn't afford to even window shop for. He held my gaze, and for the first time, I felt the full, steady weight of it. It wasn't heavy or intimidating, but it was solid, unmovable. I know it's not far, he said, his voice still quiet, but with an undercurrent of finality that brokered no argument. But tonight, it's too far to walk. Get your coat. Leo, I got my coat. The walk to the parking lot was a mad dash through a curtain of water. The wind whipped the rain into stinging needles against my face. Arthur held a large black umbrella, angling it mostly over me, his own shoulder taking the brunt of the downpour. We didn't speak. The roar of the storm was all the sound we needed. His car wasn't what I expected. I suppose I'd imagined something flashy, a sports car or a massive luxury sedan. Instead, it was a dark, immaculately clean SUV, the kind of vehicle that was expensive because it was safe and reliable, not because it needed to announce itself. He unlocked the doors, and I slid into the passenger seat, a gust of wind pushing me from behind. The door closed with a solid, satisfying thud, and the world went quiet. The roar of the storm was instantly muffled, reduced to a gentle drumming on the roof and windows. The inside of the car smelled faintly of leather and something clean, like fresh air after a thunderstorm. It was warm. The heated seats began to seep a gentle heat into my cold, damp jeans. It felt like stepping into another world. Arthur started the engine, the dashboard glowing to life with a soft, amber light. He didn't turn on the radio. The silence was comfortable, filled only by the rhythmic swish of the windshield wipers and the soft hum of the engine. He navigated the flooded streets with a calm focus, his large hands resting easily on the steering wheel. Thank you, I said, my voice sounding small in the quiet cabin. Really? You didn't have to, he glanced at me, a quick, assessing look. It was no trouble. It's better than you catching pneumonia. There was a hint of something in his tone, not quite humor, but a dry sort of warmth. Brenda would never forgive me if she lost her best bread man. I felt a small, surprised smile touch my lips. I'm the only bread man, my point stands, he said, and his eyes crinkled slightly at the corners. It was the closest I'd ever seen him come to a full smile, and it changed his whole face, softening the stern lines of his jaw. I felt my chest do a strange little flip. The rest of the drive passed in that same easy silence. I watched the city lights smear and blur through the rain-streaked window. It was a city I saw every day, but from this warm, quiet sanctuary, it looked different, less threatening, almost beautiful. When we pulled up in front of my dilapidated apartment building, I felt a familiar pang of shame. The lobby light was flickering, and a piece of cardboard was taped over a broken window pane on the ground floor. This is it, I said, reaching for the door handle. Wait, he said. He wasn't looking at my building. He was looking at me. Leo, do you have food in the house? The question caught me so off guard that I could only blink at him. It was such a strange, personal question, and the honest answer was, not much. A half-eaten box of cereal, some instant ramen, and the roll I'd pocketed from the kitchen earlier. My paycheck wasn't until Friday. I'm fine, I said, the lie tasting like ash in my mouth. He held my gaze, and I knew he could see right through me. He didn't call me out on it. He just nodded, a slow, deliberate motion. The offer for a ride stands for next week. If the weather is bad, he paused. Or even if it isn't, the offer hung in the air between us, simple and clear. It was more than just a ride. It was an opening, a door left slightly ajar. I could feel the warmth of the car, the safety of it, and the thought of stepping back out into the cold, into my empty apartment, was suddenly unbearable. "Okay," I said, my voice barely a whisper. "Thank you, Arthur, you're welcome," he replied. "Get some rest." I got out of the car and ran for the flimsy shelter of the building's awning. I didn't turn back to watch him drive away, but I heard the smooth sound of his engine pulling away from the curb. Standing in my dark, damp hallway, I could still feel the phantom warmth of the heated seat against my legs. It was a warmth that stayed with me long after I'd climbed the 4 flights of stairs to my cold little room. The following Tuesday, the weather was clear and cold. A brittle, early winter evening. I walked to the kitchen, my mind replaying the car ride over and over. I was nervous, my stomach a mess of tight knots. I wasn't sure what to expect. Would he act differently? Would he ignore me, regretting his offer? I told myself it didn't matter. It was just a ride. But when I walked in, he was already there, wiping down the stainless steel prep tables. He looked up as I entered, and his eyes met mine across the room. He gave me a small, quiet nod. That was it. No grand gesture, no awkward conversation, just a simple acknowledgement. And somehow, that was more reassuring than anything else he could have done. The knot in my stomach loosened. That night, the work felt different. We moved in our separate orbits, me at the bread station, him at the sinks, but I was constantly aware of him. I noticed the way his focus never wavered as he sprayed down the trays, the efficient economy of his movements. I found myself listening for the low timbre of his voice when he spoke to one of the other volunteers. During a lull in the line, Brenda bustled over to me. "Heard you got a ride home from the big boss last week," she said, her voice a low, teasing hum. Moving up in the world, Leo, I felt my face flush. It was raining. "My bus," she patted my arm, her eyes kind. "I'm just teasing you, sweetie. He's a good man, Arthur is. Quiet, but good." She looked over at him, a fond expression on her face. "Been volunteering here for 15 years. Ever since his wife passed. This place, I think it keeps him grounded." Her words settled in my chest, adding another layer to the man I was trying to understand. A widower. It made a certain kind of sense. It explained the air of melancholy that sometimes clung to him, the deep-seated quiet that wasn't about aloofness, but about a space that had been carved out of him. At the end of the night, as I was hanging up my apron, he was there. "Ready?" he asked. It was simple, easy, as if we'd been doing this for years. "Yeah," I said, my heart giving a little thump. "Ready?" The car ride was quiet again, but it was a different kind of quiet. It was less about the newness of the situation and more about a shared, comfortable space. This time, he turned the radio on, low, to a classical station. A soft, melancholic piano piece filled the car. "You're a student?" he asked, his eyes on the road. I said. "Graphic design. I finished my degree, but, well, it's a tough field to break into. I'm working at the shop mart on 12th for now. Paying the bills." I hated the way my voice sounded, the defensive edge to it. He just nodded. "Good design is important. It brings order and clarity to things. It's a valuable skill." I was stunned. No one had ever described my passion that way. My parents called it doodling, my old professors called it a competitive market. Arthur called it valuable. He saw the structure in it, the purpose. "I guess so," I mumbled, looking down at my hands. "Don't guess," he said, his voice firm but not unkind. "Know it." When we pulled up to my building, he didn't ask about food this time. Instead, he turned in his seat to face me more directly. The dim orange glow of the streetlights cast shadows across his face, making him look both older and more vulnerable. "Leo," he began, his tone serious. "I have a proposition for you. It's work, if you're interested. I have a large collection of art and design books at my home. They're a mess. I've been meaning to catalog them for years, create a proper digital archive. It requires someone with an eye for design, who understands the material. Someone meticulous." He paused. "I've seen how you organize the pantry shelves. You're meticulous." My mind was reeling. A job using my skills. In his home. It was too much, too fast. I don't know what to say. "Say you'll think about it," he said, cutting off any potential protests. "I would pay you well above the standard rate." We could set a schedule that works around your other job and your volunteer hours. It's a straightforward, short-term project. No strings attached." He emphasized those last words, his gaze steady and clear. He was naming the power dynamic, acknowledging it, and assuring me he had no intention of abusing it. This is what a good man does. He doesn't pretend the imbalance doesn't exist. He builds a bridge across it, made of respect and clear boundaries. "Okay," I said, the word coming out on a breath of air I didn't realize I'd been holding. "Okay, I'll think about it." "Good," he said, a small, satisfied nod. "Let me know on Thursday." I spent the next 2 days in a state of agitated excitement. The offer was a lifeline, not just financially, but emotionally. It was a chance to do something I loved, something that felt like me. But it was also a chance to be near him, to be in his space. And that was both thrilling and terrifying. The cynic in me, the part that had been kicked around by life a few too many times, whispered warnings. Was this just pity? A rich man's charity? But then I would remember his eyes, the straightforward way he spoke. No strings attached. I remembered the way he'd said my skills were valuable. He hadn't been offering a handout. He had been offering a job, one he believed I was uniquely qualified for. On Thursday, my heart hammered against my ribs as I walked into the kitchen. I found him in the dry storage room, taking inventory on a clipboard. The scent of dried beans and pasta hung in the air. He looked up as I approached. "Leo," I took a deep breath. "I'd like to accept your offer," I said, my voice steadier than I expected. "The job. I'd like to do it." He didn't smile, but the corner of his mouth ticked up slightly. He made a note on his clipboard. "Excellent. We can start this Saturday, if that works for you. Come to my house around 10. I'll text you the address." He looked at me then, his expression serious again. "And Leo, this is a professional arrangement. I expect you to treat it as such. And you can expect the same from me." "I will," I promised. "I understand," and I thought I did. But I had no idea that walking through his front door on Saturday would feel like stepping off a cliff into a whole new world. Arthur lived in a part of the city I had only ever seen in magazines. Old, established neighborhood with huge oak trees that formed a canopy over the wide, quiet streets. His house wasn't a mansion, not in the ostentatious way I might have imagined. It was a large, solid brick house, timeless and elegant, with dark green ivy climbing one wall. It looked like it had been there for a century and would be there for another. It looked like him. I stood on the front porch for a full minute, my hand hovering over the doorbell, before I finally got up the nerve to press it. The door swung open almost immediately. Arthur stood there, not in his volunteer apron, but in a soft gray sweater and dark trousers. He looked different, softer, more at home. "Leo, you're punctual. I appreciate that," he said, stepping back to let me in. Come in. The inside of his house was just as surprising as the outside. It wasn't cold or sterile like I'd imagined a rich person's house might be. It was warm and filled with books. Bookshelves lined every wall of the entryway, overflowing onto neatly stacked piles on the floor. The air smelled of old paper, lemon oil, and brewing coffee. It was the most welcoming place I had ever been. "Wow," I breathed, turning in a slow circle. "This is a lot of books." A low chuckle rumbled in his chest. "It's a bit of a problem. That's where you come in. The library is this way." He led me through a wide archway into a room that took my breath away. It was 2 stories high, with floor-to-ceiling bookshelves accessible by a rolling ladder, just like in a movie. A huge fireplace dominated one wall, and 2 worn leather armchairs were angled toward it. Sunlight streamed in through a massive bay window that overlooked a beautiful, meticulously kept garden. This was the room the project was in. This was where we would be working. "My wife, Eleanor, was a curator," he said, his voice softer now. He ran a hand along the spine of a book. "This was her passion. After she passed, I couldn't bring myself to touch it. It's been 10 years. It's time." He said it so simply, but I could feel the weight of that decade in the room, in the dust motes dancing in the sunbeams. He was letting me into this space, this memorial. It was more than a job. It was an act of trust. "It's an honor," I said, and I meant it. He showed me the system he envisioned, a digital database with photos of each book, notes on its condition, publication details. It was a massive undertaking, but it was exactly the kind of detail-oriented, organizational work I loved. He had already set up a laptop and a scanner for me on a large oak desk. "Coffee?" he asked. Please. He left me alone in the library while he went to the kitchen. I ran my hand over the desk, the wood smooth and cool beneath my palm. I looked around at the thousands of books, each a story, a world, and I was being invited in. I felt a sense of peace settle over me, a feeling that had been absent from my life for so long. I felt like I was in the right place. He returned with 2 heavy ceramic mugs. He placed one beside me. Cream or sugar? Black is fine. Thank you. He took a seat in one of the leather armchairs, not watching me work, but just being present in the room, sipping his coffee and looking into the empty fireplace. We didn't talk much that first day. The silence was filled with the soft click of the scanner, the tap of my keyboard, and the rustle of turning pages. It was a productive quiet, a shared quiet. I would occasionally glance up from my work to see him reading, his brow furrowed in concentration, a pair of reading glasses perched on his nose. I learned things about him from his books. He had an entire section on naval history, another on botany. There were first editions of classic novels tucked away next to modern poetry. It was the library of a curious, intelligent mind. It was a map of him. Around 1 o'clock, he stood up. Time for a break. Are you hungry? I can grab something later, I started to say, but he cut me off. Nonsense. I'm making sandwiches again. It wasn't a question. It was a statement of what was happening. I followed him into the kitchen, a bright, airy room with a large butcher block island in the center. He moved with an easy familiarity, pulling bread, cheese, and roasted turkey from a stainless steel refrigerator that was probably worth more than my car. We ate at the island, the silence more companionable now. How is it going in there? He asked. It's great, I said, my mouth full of the best sandwich I'd ever had. It's a perfect system. Once I get a rhythm going, I should be able to get through a few shelves a day. Good, he said. There's no rush. The goal is to do it right, not to do it fast. That became our routine. Tuesdays and Thursdays at the kitchen, Saturdays in his library. The rides home continued, the conversations growing longer, easier. I learned about his business, a logistics company he had built from the ground up and had recently sold. He learned about my frustrating attempts to find freelance work, my family back in Ohio, my dream of one day illustrating a children's book. In his library, I worked, and he was simply there. Sometimes he would read. Sometimes he would work on his own laptop. Other times, he would just sit in his chair, looking out at the garden. I got used to the quiet weight of his presence in the room. It wasn't distracting. It was grounding. One afternoon, a few weeks into the project, I was on the rolling ladder, trying to reach a heavy art book on the top shelf. It was larger than I expected, and as I pulled it free, I lost my balance for a second. The book slipped from my grasp, and I let out a small yelp. Before I could even process what was happening, Arthur was there. He moved faster than I would have thought possible. He didn't try to catch the book. He put his hands on my waist, his grip firm and steady, anchoring me to the ladder. I've got you, he said, his voice low and close to my ear. The book landed on the thick rug with a soft thud, but I barely noticed. All I could feel were his hands, the solid, warm pressure of them through my t-shirt. My breath hitched in my chest. I could feel the heat of his body behind me, smell the faint, clean scent of his soap. The world seemed to narrow to that single point of contact. I am standing on a ladder in his library, and his hands are on me. The thought is electric. It probably only lasted a few seconds, but it felt like an eternity. I gripped the sides of the ladder, my knuckles white. He didn't move his hands immediately. He just held me there, steadying me, until he was sure I had my balance. You all right? He asked, his voice still close. Yes, I managed to squeak out. Fine. Thank you. Slowly, carefully, he removed his hands. The loss of contact was a physical ache. I climbed down the ladder on shaky legs, my face burning. I knelt to pick up the book, avoiding his eyes. That one's heavier than it looks, he said, his tone even. There was no trace of awkwardness in his voice. He was giving me an out, a way to pretend it was nothing more than a simple, physical act of preventing a fall. It is, I agreed, my voice strained. I placed the book on the desk, my hands trembling slightly. He didn't mention it again. He went back to his chair and picked up his newspaper, and I went back to my work. But something had shifted. The air in the room was different now, charged with an unspoken awareness. The professional boundary he had so carefully erected had been breached, not by intention, but by instinct. His instinct to protect, my instinct to what? To lean back into him. to feel the safety of his hands. I spent the rest of the afternoon acutely aware of every move he made. The rustle of his newspaper, the soft sigh as he shifted in his chair, the clink of his mug as he set it down. The space between us felt both larger and smaller at the same time. I tried to focus on the books, on the data entry, but my mind kept replaying the feeling of his hands on my waist, the solid, reassuring strength of him. It was the first time I allowed myself to fully admit what I had been feeling for months, what had been growing in the quiet spaces of our shared work. I was falling for him. It wasn't just admiration or gratitude. It was a deep, unsettling yearning, a desire to know the man behind the quiet stillness, to understand the source of his steady strength. And that scared me more than anything, because he was my employer. He was my benefactor in so many ways. He was older, wealthier, from a world I couldn't comprehend. For him to feel the same way about me seemed impossible, a flight of fancy. And for me to act on my feelings would be a betrayal of the trust he had placed in me, a violation of the professional arrangement he had so clearly defined. So I said nothing. I worked until 5 o'clock, packed up my things, and thanked him for the day. He walked me to the door, as he always did. "I'll see you Tuesday at the kitchen," I said, keeping my eyes fixed on the doorknob. "Leo," he said, and I was forced to look up at him. His expression was serious, his eyes searching mine. "Be careful on that ladder." It was a simple statement, but I heard the echo of what was unsaid. "I was worried about you." It hung in the air between us, a fragile, shimmering thing. "I will," I whispered, and then I fled, my heart a wild, frantic bird in my chest. The dynamic between us grew more complicated with each passing week. The small touches became more frequent, though always plausible. A brush of his hand against mine as he passed me a coffee mug, his arm grazing my back as we navigated a crowded space in the soup kitchen. Each contact was a tiny spark, and I was a tinderbox of unspoken feelings, terrified of bursting into flame. I started to analyze everything. The way his gaze would linger on me for a second too long when he thought I wasn't looking. The way he sometimes paused before speaking, as if weighing his words with extra care. He was a man of quiet, deliberate actions, and I learned to read his affection in the things he did, not the things he said. He started leaving a small plate of cookies or a piece of fruit by my workspace on Saturdays. He noticed I was squinting at the laptop screen, and the next week, a brand new, larger monitor was set up on the desk. When I mentioned in passing that my coat was getting thin, a thick, warm, dark blue jacket, almost identical to his own but clearly new, was draped over the back of my desk chair the following Saturday. There was no note. He never mentioned it. It was just there, a silent gift. Each gesture was a knot in the tangled mess of my emotions. I was drowning in his quiet, steady care, and I was terrified. He was making my life better, easier, warmer. But it also felt like he was building a beautiful, comfortable cage around me, one made of gratitude and obligation. How could I ever stand as his equal if I was constantly on the receiving end of his generosity? I cherished his care, but I also chafed against the dependency it created. The tipping point came not in the quiet sanctuary of his library, but in the noisy, chaotic environment of the soup kitchen. It was the week before Christmas, and the kitchen was hosting its annual holiday dinner. The space was packed, volunteers and guests mingling together. There were decorations, and someone was playing carols on an old guitar in the corner. The atmosphere was festive, but also strained. The holidays were hard for a lot of the people we served. I was helping to carry a large tray of roasted potatoes when a man I didn't recognize, a new volunteer, cornered me by the pantry. He was a slick, overly friendly type who had been trying to network with Arthur all night. "Hey, Leo, right?" he said, a smarmy smile on his face. "I see you and Arthur are pretty close. He gives you a ride home every night, doesn't he?" I shifted the weight of the tray, my grip tightening. "He's just being kind," the man laughed, a short, unpleasant sound. "Oh, I'm sure he is. Very kind. It pays to be the pet project of the guy who signs the checks, huh? Smart move, kid." The words hit me like a physical blow, voicing all my deepest insecurities. Pet project. It was ugly and demeaning, and it cheapened everything. It reduced Arthur's genuine kindness to a calculated transaction and my genuine gratitude to a form of manipulation. My face went hot with a mixture of anger and shame. Before I could form a response, a low voice cut through the air behind me. "Is there a problem here?" It was Arthur. He had come up behind us without a sound. He wasn't looking at me. His gaze was fixed on the other volunteer, and it was as cold and hard as granite. The festive noise of the room seemed to fade into the background. The slick man's smile faltered. "Oh, Arthur. No problem at all. I was just, getting to know your protege." Arthur took a slow, deliberate step forward, placing himself slightly in front of me. It was a subtle, protective gesture, a shield. "Leo is my colleague," he said, his voice dangerously quiet. "And my friend. And I would appreciate it if you treated him with the respect that implies. Are we clear?" The man paled, his bravado evaporating under Arthur's icy stare. "Why, yes. Crystal clear. Sorry." He practically scurried away, melting back into the crowd. The silence he left behind was deafening. Arthur stood with his back to me for a long moment, his shoulders rigid. I could only stare at the back of his dark sweater, my heart pounding. He had defended me. He had called me his friend. Finally, he turned to face me. The coldness in his eyes was gone, replaced by something I couldn't quite decipher. Regret? Concern? "I am sorry you had to hear that, Leo," he said, his voice low and earnest. "It's not your fault," I mumbled, looking down at the potatoes. They were getting cold. "It is," he insisted. "I put you in this position. I knew how it might look to others. I was careless." He reached out, as if to touch my arm, but then stopped, letting his hand fall back to his side. The aborted gesture spoke volumes. He was afraid of crossing a line, afraid of proving the other man right. "Arthur," I said, finally meeting his eyes. Can we talk about this later?" "Not here." He nodded, his gaze filled with a deep, weary sadness. "Yes, of course. After we finish here, the rest of the evening passed in a blur. I went through the motions of serving and cleaning, but my mind was elsewhere. The confrontation had shattered the delicate, unspoken understanding between us. It had forced the subtext into the open, and now we had to deal with it. The ride to his house, because of course he was not going to drop me at my apartment for this conversation, was the most silent one yet. It was a heavy, loaded silence, filled with everything we hadn't said for the past 2 months. He led me not to the library, but to a smaller, cozier room I'd never been in before. A den, with a leather sofa, a small bar, and a single, dim lamp casting a warm glow over everything. He didn't turn on any other lights. He gestured for me to sit on the sofa, but he remained standing, pacing in front of the unlit fireplace. "I want to apologize again," he began, his back to me. What that man said was inexcusable, but it was a predictable consequence of my actions. "I have enjoyed your company, Leo. I have enjoyed our conversations, our time working together. I convinced myself it was a simple friendship, that I was just helping a promising young man. But that isn't the whole truth." He stopped pacing and turned to face me. His face was etched with conflict. "The truth is, my feelings for you are not entirely platonic. I have been fighting it, because of the imbalance between us. I am older. I am in a position of financial power. The last thing I ever wanted was for you to feel pressured, or obligated, or to be seen as my pet project." He said the words with a self-loathing that twisted my heart. "This is it. The door is wide open. I can walk through it, or I can close it forever. My fear is a cold, hard knot in my stomach. But the thought of losing this, of losing him, is so much worse. I take a breath, and I choose. What if I don't feel pressured?" I ask, my voice quiet but clear in the still room. "What if I don't feel obligated?" He looks at me, his eyes wide with a fragile, hesitant hope. I stand up, closing the distance between us until only a few feet remain. "What if the way I organize the pantry and the way I catalog your books is the same way I feel about you? I want to put things in the right order. I want to take care of what's important." The metaphor is clumsy, but it's the most honest thing I can think to say. "You're important to me, Arthur. Not because of the rides, or the job, or the jacket. Because of you. Because of the way you listen. Because of the way you scrub pots like it's the most important job in the world." A tremor runs through him. He takes a half step toward me. "Leo," he breathes, his voice thick with emotion. "You have to be sure. This would change everything." "I know," I say. "I want it to." I take the final step, closing the space between us completely. I can feel the warmth radiating from his body. I can see the deep, swirling emotions in his dark eyes. I reach up, my hand hesitating for a fraction of a second before I gently cup his jaw. His skin is rough with stubble, and he leans into my touch, his eyes fluttering closed. That night of the storm, he whispers, his voice ragged. I offered you a ride home. I wanted to tell you to share the night, too. To stay. But I couldn't. It wasn't right. It's right now, I whisper back. And then I close the final inch between us and kiss him. It's not a kiss of frantic passion or desperate release. It is slow and deliberate. It is a question and an answer all at once. His lips are firm and warm, and for a moment, he is perfectly still, as if absorbing the shock of it. Then, with a soft, shuddering sigh, he kisses me back. His hand comes up to rest on my waist, right where it had been that day in the library. But this time there is no ladder, no accident. This time, it is a choice. His grip is gentle but firm, pulling me closer until there is no space left between us at all. It feels like coming home. It feels like every scattered, anxious piece of me is finally settling into place. The kiss deepens, becoming more confident, a mutual exploration. I can taste the faint, bitter notes of the coffee he drank earlier, can feel the strength in his arms as he holds me. All the fear, all the uncertainty that has been plaguing me for months, simply dissolves in the steady, quiet rightness of this moment. When we finally break apart, we are both breathless. He rests his forehead against mine, his eyes still closed. His thumb strokes gentle circles on my hip. We just stand there for a long time, breathing each other in, letting the reality of what just happened settle around us. Leo, he says, his voice rough. He opens his eyes, and they are so full of raw, unguarded emotion that it almost makes me want to look away. I have wanted to do that for a very long time, me too. I confess, a giddy, relieved laugh bubbling up in my chest. I was just too scared. I was too, he admits. I was terrified of getting it wrong. Of hurting you, you didn't. I assure him, my hand still resting on his cheek. You got it exactly right. I feel a profound sense of peace, a calm certainty that this, right here, is where I am supposed to be. The weight of his gaze, which I had once found so intimidating, now feels like the softest, safest blanket in the world. He led me to the sofa, and we sat, not touching, but with our knees brushing. The comfortable distance was a courtesy, a way of giving me space after such an intense moment, and I loved him for it. He didn't assume. He didn't push. He waited. We need to be smart about this, he said finally, his voice regaining some of its usual steadiness. What happened tonight? It was wonderful, but the issues that man raised, as crudely as he put them, are real. I am still your employer. We still operate in a world that will look at us and make assumptions. I nodded, my heart sinking a little. I had been so caught up in the emotion, I hadn't thought about the practicalities. What do we do? First, he said, turning to look at me, his expression resolute. We finish the project. You will continue to work for me, and I will continue to pay you until the job is done. We maintain that professional boundary. It's important for you, for your own sense of agency, and it's important for me to know that this, he gestured between us, is entirely separate. It is not a transaction. I felt a wave of relief. He wasn't dismissing my feelings or his own. He was protecting them. He was building a proper foundation, brick by brick, based on respect. Okay, I said. I can do that. And after the project is done, he continued, a softer look in his eyes, we can begin as two men, as friends, as whatever this becomes. We can go on a proper date. We can figure this out, together, on equal footing. It was the most romantic thing anyone had ever said to me. He wasn't sweeping me off my feet with grand gestures. He was offering me a partnership, one built with care and foresight. He was making sure I was walking beside him, not trailing in his shadow. I'd like that, I said, a real, genuine smile spreading across my face. I'd like that a lot. He reached out then and took my hand, his large, warm fingers lacing through mine. It was a simple, solid connection. A promise. The next morning, I woke up in my own cold, cramped room, but for the first time, it didn't feel lonely. The memory of the night before was a warm coal glowing in my chest. I felt a flutter of anxiety, the familiar morning after doubt. Was it real? Did I imagine the depth of emotion in his eyes? My phone buzzed on the nightstand. A text from a number I didn't have saved, but I knew who it was. Good morning, Leo. I hope you slept well. Coffee will be ready at 10, if you're still coming. It was so normal, so practical. So, Arthur, It wasn't a flowery declaration of love. It was a simple confirmation. What happened last night was real. I am still here. Our plan is still in place. When I arrived at his house, the front door was unlocked. I let myself in, my heart doing a nervous little dance. The smell of coffee and bacon filled the air. I found him in the kitchen, wearing an old, soft-looking t-shirt and jeans, flipping bacon in a cast-iron skillet. He looked up when I came in, and a slow, warm smile spread across his face. It was a real smile this time, one that reached his eyes, and it made him look 10 years younger. "Good morning," he said, his voice a low rumble. "I hope you like bacon." "I do," I said, leaning against the doorframe, just watching him. It felt so incredibly domestic, so comfortable. The awkwardness I had feared was nowhere to be found, chased away by his easy confidence. We ate breakfast at the island, just as we had before, but everything was different. The space between us was no longer a gulf of uncertainty, but a comfortable orbit. We talked about the book project, about a problem at the soup kitchen, about the weather. Normal things. But underneath it all, there was a new current, a low hum of shared intimacy. I would catch him looking at me, and instead of quickly looking away, he would hold my gaze, his eyes full of a quiet, happy warmth. Over the next few weeks, we lived in that strange, beautiful in-between space. I worked diligently in his library, and he respected the boundary we had set. He would bring me coffee. We would have lunch together, but there was no more kissing, no more physical intimacy beyond the occasional, lingering touch of our hands as we passed something to one another. It was a period of deliberate, quiet courtship, happening in parallel to our professional arrangement. It was a slow burn, and it was exquisite. I learned to see the love in his practicality. He helped me create a proper invoice for my work, teaching me how to manage my finances as a freelancer. He looked over my portfolio, giving me sharp, insightful critiques that were more helpful than anything my professors had ever offered. He wasn't solving my problems for me. He was giving me the tools to solve them myself. He was investing in my future, in my independence. The day I scanned the very last book, a bittersweet feeling settled over me. I typed the final entry, saved the database, and leaned back in my chair. It was done. The project that had brought us together was finished. It was both an end and a beginning. I found him in the garden, tending to his rose bushes. He looked up as I approached, a knowing look on his face. "It's finished," I said. He nodded, snipping a perfect, deep red rose from a bush. He straightened up and walked over to me. "You did wonderful work, Leo. Eleanor would have loved what you've done." He held the rose out to me. "This is your final payment." I took it, my fingers brushing against his. The velvet of the petals was cool against my skin. "Thank you so," he said, his eyes sparkling with a hint of mischief. "Leo, the freelance archivist. Now that my professional obligation to you is concluded, would you do me the honor of having dinner with me tonight? As my friend, and as the man I am." Very quickly falling in love with my breath caught in my throat. He had never said the word love before. Hearing it from him, said in his steady, honest way, was like the sun breaking through the clouds. "Yes," I said, my voice thick. "Yes, Arthur. I would love that." That night marked the true beginning. We went to a small, quiet Italian restaurant where the owner knew him by name. We talked for hours, not as employer and employee, but as two people discovering each other. He told me about his wife, about their happy marriage and his profound grief when she died. He spoke of his loneliness, not with self-pity, but as a simple fact of his life for the past decade. I told him about my own struggles, my feelings of failure and inadequacy after college, my fear of never finding my place in the world. He listened, his attention absolute. He didn't offer solutions or platitudes. He just listened, and in his listening, I felt seen. I felt understood. When he took me home that night, he walked me to the door of my apartment building. Under the flickering lobby light, he turned to me. "I want to kiss you again," he said, his voice low. "But I also want to do this right. May I?" The explicit question, the clear request for consent after everything we had already shared, was the most profound act of respect he could have shown me. He was still building that bridge, making sure every single plank was secure. "Yes," I breathed. "Please," and he did. It was even better than the first time, filled with the certainty of knowing this was real, that this was our choice. We took things slowly, at a pace that felt right for us. I continued working my job at the shop mart, continued volunteering. I insisted on it. I needed to maintain my own life, my own independence. He understood completely. He never pushed for more than I was ready to give. Our relationship was built on Tuesday and Thursday nights at the kitchen, on quiet weekends at his house, on long walks, and even longer conversations. A few months later, I landed my first big freelance design project. A local bakery wanted a full rebranding. It was a huge opportunity, and I was terrified. Arthur was my biggest cheerleader. He let me use his den as my workspace, never interrupting, just quietly leaving coffee and snacks on the desk. He was my silent, steady support. One Saturday morning, I was at his house, sketching out logo ideas. He was in the kitchen, and the smell of fresh coffee filled the air. I looked around the beautiful, quiet room, at the comfortable leather sofa, the shelves of books, the sunlight streaming through the window. It felt more like home than my own apartment ever had. I walked into the kitchen. He was standing by the counter, looking out at the garden, a thoughtful expression on his face. I came up behind him and wrapped my arms around his waist, resting my cheek against his back. He felt so solid, so real. He relaxed into my embrace, placing his hands over mine. "Everything okay?" he asked. "Everything is perfect," I said, my voice muffled by his shirt. We stood like that in comfortable silence for a long time, watching a small bird peck at a feeder in the garden. The difference in our ages, in our bank accounts, it all seemed to fade away in these quiet moments. It was just context, the background scenery of our lives. It wasn't the story itself. The story was here, in this kitchen, in this easy, comfortable embrace. He turned in my arms to face me, his hands cupping my face. His thumbs gently stroked my cheeks. "You know," he said, his voice a low, happy rumble. "Brenda told me she thinks you're putting extra butter on my roll at the kitchen." I laughed, a bright, happy sound that filled the room. "And what did you tell her?" "I told her I was a lucky man," he said, his expression turning serious, his eyes full of a deep, abiding love that I knew was reflected in my own. "The luckiest man in the world." He leaned down and kissed me, a slow, familiar kiss that tasted of coffee and home. And in that moment, I knew he was right. We both were. We had found each other in the steam and clatter of a soup kitchen, two lonely souls moving in separate orbits. And now, we had built a new world together, one founded not on dependency or obligation, but on mutual care, profound respect, and a quiet, steady love that felt as solid and timeless as the house around us. It was a good foundation. The best. Share your thoughts in the comments. What moment stayed with you? If the story resonated, a like helps others find it. Subscribe for more slow burn male/male love stories told with warmth and care.